Welcome to Module 13 of the Freedom Ticket. This module is one that's really important for you to pay attention to because it's about cash. It's about cash flow. You know, when you're selling physical products, one of the things that people often overlook is it's super cash intensive. They get caught up in all the profits and the ROI and the excitement of creating logos and brands and making new products that come to market. But they forget about how much cash this business really takes. And so in this module, I want to talk about some ways that you can minimize cash outflow and increase cash inflow. And so I'm going to give you like 10 tips here at the beginning, and then we'll talk about some other things about how you can really take a hard look at your cash flow, because if you mess this up, your chances of success go way down. So this is very critical that you understand all this and that you really, maybe you have to go back and watch this module a second time and take some good notes. And at the end, I'm going to give you a couple of references that you really should take a hard look at as well to supplement your learning here. So let's take a look at 10 ways that you can actually increase your cash flow. The first thing is to minimize inventory. If you can minimize your inventory, you can decrease your cash flow. If you're overbuying, if you're overspending, and you're buying too much, then that's going to hurt you because you're not going to have the ROIs that you need. You're going to be spending more money and waiting longer to get that money back. So how do you know how much inventory to buy? I'm going to show you an exact formula once we get later into actually picking products and doing that whole process in the course. I'm going to show you the exact formula to determine how much inventory you should buy. And a lot of people mess this up. They'll just go by what the MOQ is, and maybe they need more than that, maybe they need less than that. The trick is you got to make sure you don't run out of stock, because if you cut the corners too low here, you can actually hurt yourself on selling on Amazon. So you never want to be out of stock for more than a week. I typically like to have at least 30 days worth of inventory in hand as a cushion for any kind of delays or factory problems or holidays or whatever it may be. But by minimizing your inventory and getting a really good grasp on inventory control, you can actually increase your cash flow. The second of these 10 ways is to get lower MOQs. So maybe you go to a factory and they say, we need you to buy 2,000 units. That's our MOQ. But maybe when you run through the formula that we're going to give you, you only need 1,300. But because the factory says you need to buy 2,000 at a minimum, you're like, okay, here's the money and I'll get 2,000. Well, that ties up more of your inventory. That hurts your cash flow. So the thing is to either find another factory or to actually negotiate with that factory and say, look, Mr. Factory Owner, I'm going to end up buying, if my projections are right, and you can show them your spreadsheet. You can say, look, here's my projections. This is based on sound and true stuff. I think that over the next year, I'm going to order 10,000 units. I'm going to probably order 1,300 now, I'm going to order 1,500 in 2 months from now, and whatever your projections are. And a lot of times when you show them that, they'll say, okay, we'll work with you. We'll give you 1,300 units right now. That can decrease how much cash you got to put out of hand. That's a very important thing in the negotiations. The third thing that you can do is you reduce your lead time. So you can find suppliers that can prepare stuff quicker for you. Sometimes, I've seen suppliers that come off of Alibaba that actually can get the stuff into me in 8 days or 10 days. Other ones take 2 months or 3 months. Sometimes by changing countries versus sourcing in China, it might be cheaper, per unit cost. But if you can get the same thing made in the United States, maybe it costs you an extra 15 cents a unit. But in the end, it saves you 2 months of time and 2 months of tying up your cash. Because typically when you place an order with a factory, you'll see this when we get into the ordering module, is they want 30% of the money up front and 70% of it before it ships. That's the typical terms. Sometimes those vary to 40-60 or 20-80, but typically it's 30% up front and 70% before it ships. And you can negotiate those terms. That's the fourth thing you can do is maybe in the beginning you can't do this because you're brand new and don't have a record. But once you have a track record with the factory, you can go to them and say, look, I need better terms. We're going to try to grow this business together. We're going to try to do really good together. So can I get 20% down and 80% when it's ready to ship? Or can I get 20% down, 30% when it's ready to ship, and 50% once it arrives to the port in Los Angeles or whatever? You can negotiate some of those things. And if you have a good supplier, a lot of times they're willing to work with you on that. So suppliers' terms are another thing you can do. There's also something once you've been selling in China for a while, it's called Sinosure, Sinosure. And it's a program from the Chinese government where they will actually insure a factory for up to $200,000. So they will actually, your factory can go to them. You cannot go to them. You cannot apply to Sinosure, but your factory can. And if you mention this to your factory, say, hey, are you guys using Sinosure? They may look at you like, how do you know about that? It's like an insider trick. But then they can go to Sinosure, and if you can't do this on your first order unless you've been importing for a while. But once you've been importing for a while, you have a little bit of a history, they will take this company will take a look at it and say, look, this guy has been importing. Yeah, we'll go ahead and back this invoice. And so then your supplier gets terms. So you can turn that around and say, hey, you should give me terms too. Sometimes they get up to a year to pay that back. So the fifth best way you can minimize your cash flow is increase your sales price. So you can sell for more. So sometimes you might start off selling for $19.95, but what if people would pay $20.95 for this, or $21.95? There's going to be a magic point. So you want to test. There's software tools that will do this for you, or you can do it manually. So if you can actually sell for a higher price and still get a similar volume of sales, that can be great. Also, when you're looking at price, sometimes, I've sold stuff for $40 when everybody else is selling stuff for $20. And I sell half as much as they do, but I make more profit than they do, and I have less inventory. So you got to look at those things. It's always not about the lowest price. Sometimes it's about differentiating and justifying a higher price and selling less to actually make more. So you got to think about that as well. Another thing is you got to make sure you track your advertising ROI. You got to know really what you're spending on advertising. On Amazon, they call that ACOS, ACOS, advertising cost of sale. That's a number that Amazon gives to you, and a lot of people spit out. It's a number you should pretty much ignore, 100% ignore. You actually, we'll talk about this more in the pay-per-view model, pay-per-click module, but it's called tacos. Like, I'm going to eat tacos. It's total ACOS. Your total advertising spend should not be more than 10% of your overall sales. Good numbers are targeted between 6 and 10%. So you're going to look at advertising spend as a total over your overall sales, not just what you're spending on your PPC. If you're just looking at your ACOS on your PPC, you're making a huge mistake. We'll talk about that more in the PPC module, but you really need to know what those numbers are and how your advertising is generating, what it's generating back for, and how it's affecting your organic sales, which means people that are just searching without looking at an ad, and your sponsored ad sales, which are the sales that come from people actually clicking on ads. It should be a ratio of about 20 to 80 on Amazon, 20% from sponsored ads, 80% from organic. So the other thing you want to look at to save costs is review your business expenses. So maybe you're wasting a lot of money on stuff you don't need. Maybe you got 17 different software tools. Get rid of 16 of them because all you need is Helium 10. They got, it started out with 10 tools, and now it's like 20 some odd tools all in one package for one thing a month. So unless you really need some other tool that's just a fancy dance that does something that Helium 10 doesn't do, you should be able to get almost everything you need by just using the Helium 10 tools and sticking with that and cutting your cost. I see some people spending $1,000, $2,000 a month on software, and most of these things they don't use it once or twice, and they forget they have it. They're wasting so much money. So look at your business expenses and make sure you're not wasting money. The other thing is a way to actually increase your cash flow is use other people's money. The thing about some people don't want to be in debt, but there's smart debt and there's bad debt. So sometimes when you're in the inventory business and the product development business, you got to take smart debt, which can be some loans. As long as the interest rates are decent, there's a lot of people that will rip you off out there. There's a lot of companies that specialize in financing Amazon sellers, and they take a big cut. And you want to try to avoid some of those guys. But there's ways to get financing that at a fair rate, and sometimes the trade-off there is better because you could take on a partner. So instead of getting financing, you could take on an equity partner and say you go to your friend or your uncle and say, hey, if you put in 50 grand, I'll give you 20% of the company. But you got to think about that, because if you give that guy, he gives you 50 grand for 20% of the company, can you get a loan for $50,000 from somebody else, even if you have to pay 20% interest and pay $10,000 back on that loan? You have to pay $60,000 back. You're like, oh my God, that's just crazy. I'd rather he put the money in. Well, you got to think about it. If you're growing this as a true business, in 3 years or 4 years from now, you sell the company for $1 million, let's say. His 20% is now worth $200,000. So for him putting in 50, you just gave him 140 grand because he got 50 plus the 10% interest, that you, 10,000 in interest that you paid. The difference is $140,000. You just paid him 140 grand. For that. So sometimes it's better to take debt. You got to be smart about it. You don't want debt to saddle you and to put you out of business, but sometimes debt is actually better than equity. So you got to be careful with that and think about that. Think about that all the way through about what your goals are. Another thing you can do is you can lease assets. So instead of like buying your office equipment, buying your desk, buying your furniture, buying your computers, you can actually lease them, because you have to check with your accountant and your CPA, and your bookkeeper, but leasing assets can oftentimes give you a tax advantage over actually buying the assets. So sometimes buying is better for the depreciation. Sometimes leasing is actually better. So take a look at that. That can actually free up some cash flow. And of course, the last way is just increase your sales. I mean, that doesn't mean just your sales price, but your total sales all the way across the board. So if you can increase your sales, I mean, that's kind of an obvious, but do things that are going to raise your sales up, and focus on those things, and not all the little piddly things that aren't going to do that. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can scale your business by selling on Amazon. The first way is cash flow, which we just talked about. The second way is taking an investment. So sometimes when you're first starting, you might not be able to get a loan. So maybe the only option is to actually go out and actually take an investment from a partner or from a family member or someone like that. But if you can take a loan, that's typically better than taking an investment, unless there's just some otherwise compelling reason, or you're afraid, you don't want to take all the risk. But traditionally, banks don't like Amazon Business. If you go to a normal bank, your Chase Bank, your Bank of America, and say, I need a loan, they're going to look at you funny. Unless you've got like A+ credit, 800 credit score, they might give you a personal loan. Or unless you have a previously relationship with them, if you have some other business, they might give you some loan. But if you're brand new and you're going to walk into your bank, they're most likely not going to give you a loan, or going to make you do a lot of paperwork. Now, there are companies out there that will give you money. Once you're up and selling for a little while, there's MCA lenders, which I don't recommend you do. You can get credit cards. If you go to like bankrate.com, you can search for there, and there's a lot of credit cards that are 0% interest for like a year and a half. And so you can take that money and use either the cash advance option, which is at 3%, and still has 0% interest for a year and a half. So that's like a 3% loan, or you can pay using credit card. That's one way. I know some people have gotten creative. You can go to friends and family and get the money. There's companies out there that specialize, and they take it. They don't really look at your credit score. They look at your bank statements, your last 3 months worth of bank statements. You have to give them access, and they do this analysis. Companies like Bluevine and Cabbage and On Deck and some of these guys, and they'll give you like 6-month loans. But the interest rates are typically, they don't really call them interest rates. They call them points and stuff, but they're really interest rates. They're 30-40%. They're pretty high. If you have a PayPal account and you've been selling on eBay for a while, or doing a lot of business on PayPal, PayPal has PayPal lending. Some people do a Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaign, which I don't really recommend you do unless you have experience in that. Those are kind of a science and a trick among themselves. They're not so easy to do. There's a whole process there. You really got to learn, and sometimes the people doing those are spending a lot of money just to do those, and they're using them more as a launch pad than they are a cash infusion pad. There's companies that specialize in Amazon lending. There's several of them out there that they tie into your Amazon account and they specialize in it. There's a company out of Israel right now that's going to be coming in called PayZgo, that's actually going to be helping underwrite a lot of sellers. Some of these freight forwarders like Freightos will actually give you cash advance loans once you have a relationship with them. People like Payoneer and Ping Pong that you're doing money transfers through, once they see what kind of volume you're doing, they'll give you money. Amazon Lending is also someone that will give money, but you have to be selling on Amazon for a year before you can have Amazon Lending. So it's not something that's available in the beginning, and you have to have a pretty good track record, a pretty good seller rating, no real problems. But those loans can go from anywhere from from $1,000 all the way up to $1 million. And you get 6 months or 12 months to pay those back, and the interest rates are usually 10 to 13% or so. So sometimes those are the better loans to take, but that's through Amazon Lending, and you can't apply for that. That's something they offer to you after you've been selling for a year if you qualify. It just shows up in your account, and you can say yes or no. And usually the amounts start small and they go up, and they're based on a bunch of criteria. So another way to actually get to increase your cash flow and to get some extra money is to negotiate with your suppliers. Your suppliers, this may not work at the very beginning once you have a brand new relationship with a supplier, but once you've been working with them for a while, you can often go to them and ask for terms. Maybe instead of 30% down and 70% when it's ready to ship, you can actually do 20% down, 30% when it's ready to ship, and 50% 30 days later after it arrives to Amazon, or whatever you can negotiate. Or maybe you even negotiate a higher price. Instead of paying them $1.20 a unit, you pay them $1.22 a unit. And in exchange for that, they give you longer terms. And that turns out to be a much lower interest rate than if you had to go other places. You can get real creative with this. And a lot of times if you show them, you be transparent and you say, look, here's my forecast, here's my spreadsheet for the next year. If we work together, here's how I can grow, here's what I can do. It can work wonders with getting terms from your suppliers. Another thing is go over and visit your suppliers. Once you are up and running, if you have the cash or the time and you're dealing with suppliers in China or India or wherever, go and visit them, especially in places like India and China. FaceTime, it's called Guangxi in China, is so important. And just by going and visiting them, having a beer with them, eating some strange foods, going and visiting their factory, sometimes that means so much to them. You become part of their family and they start being much nicer to you with terms potentially, with maybe actually raising you up on the ladder when you need a product quicker. They put you ahead of other people in the queue. There's trips that go over to China. So there's several. If you look down in the notes here, there's a couple of different trips that go to China into India, the sourcing trips that take you to the Canton Fair and they take you to the Yiwu market and some of those places. You can go over to check those out. So there's some really good opportunities there to negotiate with your suppliers. So if you're going to get a loan, there's some things that you need to be aware of that are going to determine whether or not you may qualify. Typically, you're going to need at least 3 months worth of being in business. So if you're brand new to get a loan, unless you're doing a personal guarantee or it's on your personal credit, it's going to be really difficult. So typically, you need at least 3 months in business. You typically need about $10,000 a month or more in revenue for most places to get a loan. And your credit score, and you need to be, if you're getting a loan, most of it is you need to be a U.S. citizen. So it's going to be very difficult for those of you that are selling from outside the U.S. to get a loan from a U.S.-based company. There are some exceptions to that. Some of the companies that specialize in Amazon lending, where there may be someone in your country, especially if you're in Europe, that specializes in that can help you out. But your credit score in the U.S. is going to need to be at least a 620 or higher, with no liens and no derogatory remarks. Some may require more than that, but that's pretty much the minimum. You got to make sure there's no tax liens or no judgments on there that can affect you. No recent bankruptcies. Typically, it's like in the last 2 to 3 years, you haven't done a bankruptcy. And they also look at your average bank balances. So you want to have at least 4 figures or above. The higher, the better, as your average daily bank balance. So if you're constantly draining your account down to 20 bucks, then more money comes in, you spend it, and so on. That's going to actually hurt you. And you want to make sure you don't do any personal transactions inside your business account. You're not paying your rent. You're not paying any personal expenses. You're not paying for the wife's laundry or whatever out of the business account. You want to keep those to a bare minimum. And then a lot of times they're actually going to ask for 2 years of tax returns as well, either personal tax returns or business tax returns. And usually they want to see at least 3 months of your past bank statements, especially once you get over about $125,000. For small loans, they may not ask for that. But if you get over the $100,000, $125,000 mark, they're going to start asking for a couple years worth of tax returns, most recent bank statements, and so forth. So if you're actually going to take a loan, you want to keep a few things in mind. If you're starting out small and you don't have access to cash or you don't have the right ROIs, you need to understand that you're probably going to stay small selling on Amazon. And you're going to need to find another way to support yourself because you're not going to be able to take a lot of money out. Now, there's companies, like I said, that some of the payment processors like Ping Pong and Payability and some of those guys will actually help you get money. Payability is another company out there that will actually, Amazon typically pays you every 2 weeks. So you're going to get your money about every 2 weeks, and sometimes they put a hold on some of that money. Sometimes it gets delayed like an extra week or two because of whatever reason. Amazon has criteria where they'll put an extra hold on that. So you might not get all of your money every 2 weeks. There might be a little bit of a delay. So Payability is a company that will, for a fee, for a small percentage, will actually give you about 70 to 80% of your money on a daily basis, and then pay themselves back from Amazon. So once you get to a certain point, that could be something that you take a look at. The other way is like some people have old school accounts. Like I personally have an old school account. I get my money every day. I can hit a button on Amazon, and every 24 hours they pay me. So, but that doesn't happen anymore unless you're a big seller. Some new sellers get paid every week, but for the most part, it's every 2 weeks that you're going to get paid. So don't worry about if you have to use other people's money. Try never to give a personal guarantee if you can. Try to do everything through your business. All the credit cards you set up are through your business. All the loans are set up through your business. But sometimes it's inevitable. You still have to give a personal guarantee. But if you can avoid giving the personal guarantee, try to do that. And remember, debt can be good. It can really help you grow. It may be necessary. A lot of guys that have really taken this to the next level have had to take on debt. But you can get creative with it, like I talked about, negotiating with suppliers and other ways. Try not to use an equity line of credit on your house or any of your personal credit cards. Try to avoid doing that if at all possible. And just understand, if you do take some loans, you're probably going to have what's called a UCC filed on you. So Universal Commercial Code is what it stands for. It's a document that's filed with your state that you live in. And it basically says that we gave this guy $20,000 or $10,000. And it's basically a public notice that somebody loaned you money and that they have a right to that money. In the case that you go bankrupt or you default and there's 10 people in line saying, hey, Kevin owes me money, this is how they determine who gets money first. So it's called a UCC filing. And those filings go on the record and says that whoever filed it first basically gets paid first. And so they will file this to protect themselves. And so if you're trying to buy a house or you're trying to move or do something else in your personal life, having some of those can actually be a disadvantage for you as well. Now, there's two other things that are in this module that I highly recommend that you check out. And one of those things is there's about a 170-page download of this PDF, this Amazon Seller's Bookkeeping Guide. This is made by one of the top accounting guys that's in the space. So I highly recommend you download this. It's a free guide for everything about bookkeeping on Amazon. And it may bore you to tears, or it's something you can give to your bookkeeper or your CPA to take a look at. But doing accounting for e-commerce is quite a bit different than traditional businesses. So if you're just using a bookkeeper or a CPA that is used to brick and mortar or traditional businesses, you may want to consider switching to someone that has e-commerce experience, because it's a different animal. And there's another thing that you might want to take a look at as well. And I mentioned this in one of the other modules. That's this book called Profit First for E-commerce Sellers. This book, there was a book that came out, I think it's in 2014, called Profit First. And just recently in 2019, this particular book called Profit First for E-commerce Sellers came out. And as you can see, it's pretty thin. There should be a link down below where you can buy it on Amazon. It's not too expensive. But this book is really, really good at giving you the right mindset of how you need to allocate your money on Amazon. How much should you take out for your personal salary? How much should you allocate for inventory? How much should you allocate for marketing? And it gives you the discipline and the structure that a lot of people really need in this business to really have a better chance of success. I know the people that have done this, it's really made a big difference in their business. And they have some really good spreadsheets. Once you buy the book, they give you a link to like 7 or 8 different spreadsheets that you can download that are all these different cash flow spreadsheets that are going to really help you out in forecasting everything from inventory to how much money you need to, like you remember in the last module, we had one of the earlier modules, we had a little spreadsheet where you could see if you need to make $40,000 a year, this is how much you need to sell. They got all kinds of cool stuff like that. So this is a quick read. You can read it in probably a couple hours, but it's going to give you a really good handle on how you should really approach e-commerce selling and how it's truly different than everything else. So take a look at this as well, and I hope this helps you out. So that's what I wanted to tell you about cash flow, and so hopefully this module has helped you, and we will see you in the next module.